welcome to my studio, and I thought that this month I would have a little chat about where I'm at, where I've been, what my plans are, and show you a little bit of some of the things I've been doing in the studio, but more about kind of what materials I'm using at the minute and how I am moving my creativity forwards, because I think that's what we're all aiming for, isn't it? We don't want to get stuck. We want to do a series of work and then that flow seamlessly into another series of work, and it doesn't work like that. My recent blog post is kind of about that stuck feeling that came out of that back end of winter, through a winter that I've been stuck for various reasons and not felt that flow, and it is really hard. It's a hard place to be. It's, you know, it's the equivalent of writer's block, isn't it? And it's how you negotiate and kindly move your creative soul through that feeling and those fears that you're never going to create something creative again, or that you're just not doing it right, that it's just not working. And so I've often spoken about how we go in sideways, how we nurture ourselves creatively, and I've been doing a bit of that. And I think what I really needed was to get away, which I was very fortunate to be able to do, and got up to the Yorkshire coast last week. And it was a funny week because I didn't feel refreshed and joyful, and kind of that creativity was coming in on the clouds. I felt a bit disconnected, and I didn't have as much time to be creative as I wanted. I think that's, you know, sharing a holiday with your family, it doesn't always give you that time, does it? You take your sketchbook, you take all your intentions, but it doesn't often happen. Well, it can happen. It just didn't happen for me last week. But when I got home, I felt like I had lifted something off. I felt that I'd moved through this transitional space into wanting to be creative again, wanting that studio time. And so I've been translating I did some little sketches, kind of thumbnails in a notebook really. And they were kind of took me back to when I started doing landscape work, and this idea of capturing a moment in time, capturing just something that just stops you in your tracks, whether that's the flight of a bird through a scene or whether it's colours that you see, rather than trying to do the thing with the sketchbook of capturing everything and bringing that back to the studio. So I've been working on some small studies, and I have been also trying to capture the colour of this changing season, which I love. Spring is my favourite season, and that wake up, that intensity, that lushness of greens and yellows. And in the UK we've got the rapeseed fields out, those kind of splashes of yellow that you get across the landscape, which are just so joyful. And that awakening, I think that energy's just started to kind of find somewhere in me and find new ideas and directions. And I've started to set some new boundaries, and I kind of just lock in what it is that I want to do over the next few months. And I think it's easy to kind of just get fixated on the end point. I've talked about this before, without allowing new ideas to be processed, to be tried out, to make the mistakes, to put things in the bin. And I think as a professional artist, you kind of get even more locked into what the end point's going to be, how it's going to fit in a frame, how it's going to sit in a collection, where it's going to be, how you're going to sell it. And so taking all of that off, that mental thought, that energy that you put into thinking about the future, and actually bringing your creativity back into the mindful moment of just doing. Well, I mean, we know, don't we, if you've got any had any kind of experimentation or commitment to a meditation process, it's very difficult to just bring it into the moment. And yet that is what we need to do, and that is why creativity is so beautiful. It's so wonderful when you do get lost in it and you forget that you should be cooking the dinner, and you forget that you've got a house that's mucky. You just get on with doing it and feeling that energy rising in you and coming through you. And that's where that bliss comes from creativity. And it isn't always there. But if you don't turn up for it, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get those moments of connection and joy and motivation to keep going. I'm going to flip the camera around. I'm just going to show you my workspace behind. It's in full flow. It's very real. I've tried not to tidy up. There's lots of stuff hidden over the back as well. That's just kind of, I've had deliveries recently of cards and things like that. And so eventually you just have to get on, don't you? So that's what I've been doing. I've been getting on, and I'll take you for a little tour behind me of what I'm doing. And I hope that you're finding some refreshment in the opening up of the season, of the opening up of energy, and that you've got some good things planned to reinvigorate your creativity. But at the end of the day, you can just find some space and time and motivation to express yourself. I recently found this picture in a drawer, and it was a piece that I did on a live sketchbook workshop a few years ago as a kind of example of just kind of how we can loosely capture the landscape. Not everything has to be precise and finished. And at the time I felt it was just too loose, and now I'm really relishing the looseness of this, and I want to create some work that has this immediacy, and I'm loving all the textures and marks in there too. And so after being away last week, I've been trying to get some of that immediate mark, and I've created a couple of small landscapes here which are yet to be collaged into. And I think I'm taking more joy in the media, the paint and the mark behind the collage. It used to be that my pictures were much more about the collage, and now the collage is an enhancement. And this is definitely influenced by this spring landscape that is around, and that acid yellow of the rapeseed fields. And I've got my palette there, which is very much showing those colours that I've been using. It's a little work of art in its own right. And different materials have been creeping in, and I think this comes from teaching. It comes from running the online community that I run, the Nurtured Artist. That other people share their techniques and ideas, and you think, oh, I haven't done that for ages, or I haven't used that before. So I've got things like the printing ink for lino cutting, but sometimes I use that to do monoprints to create textures. And then these came onto my radar, Vista paint, which are a kind of, I think they are, oh, what's the word? My brain's not working. Some of them are granule and some of them are mixed, and they're pigments, so they're very much natural colours, and they're great to mix in with other things I use, like India ink. I use quite a lot of this brand, the Dr. Martens Bombay India inks. Beautiful coloured pigments in those. And these all mix in with the acrylics that I use too. So I use Liquitex basic acrylics. I've never kind of migrated as calling myself an artist into using the sort of top brand paints. I think because I'm a mixed media artist, I like to mix the different things. I'm drawn to colour mostly, and I think as well, because I create lots of backgrounds and I cut from those, I use the sort of basic brands. So one of the other brands I use is Deco Art. That's a much more fluid acrylic. And then I also use chalk paint. These are chalk paint tester pots that I've got. They're a lovely matte surface, and it's a really nice surface to draw on top of, actually. And then, of course, if you've done any of my courses, you'll know that I use a lot of these tester pots as well, which are emulsion wall paint. So I'm really not a snob about my art materials. I just use what's to hand, and I mix it all in together and see what happens. And other things I've brought into my process recently, I've got these lovely pastels. They're water-based pastels, water-soluble oil pastels. There you go. And this brand have got just these lovely tones, because you can find that you open up a sort of box of these things and you've got your red, you've got your yellow, you've got your green, but they're not very well, especially intuitive to the sort of natural palette. So I've really enjoyed using those. And recently, on the advice of people in the Nurtured Artist group as well, I've bought some Inktense blocks. And they're fab because you can use them in that dry state, and then you slosh a bit of water on and you get this beautiful intensity, inky intensity of colour. I think to begin with I was a little disappointed that the box was a little bit sort of, you know, bright and breezy, but actually some of these other blocks in there, that pink, There's a lovely indigo blue that I've really enjoyed using. And these I stole off my husband. They're soft pastels, and they're a bit more chalky. They don't stick to the surface as much, but they're quite fun to draw with and fun to bring in a little bit of those pops of bright colour that can sort of sit on the surfaces. Another drawn line really. I use a lot of charcoal to draw with, and I think that gestural mark can come back in later, and I can add these layers of small marks which kind of come through because of just adding media on top. You see that there with the yellow, I think that's the Inktense there. So there's a real enjoyment, I think, of those different layers of media, and then bringing it forward. I've got another one that I've worked on, adding in some collage areas as well, and that's what I'm going to be working towards. I'm trying to create a small collection, and this weekend I'm going to go out and do some drawings and try and get some larger kind of landscapes in, more based in reality rather than memory. So there we go. That's a little tour around. Got some collage papers stacking up under here, ready to use. I find if I put things away, I sometimes forget that I've made them. These are all monoprinted surfaces. Really enjoying those accidental marks which have come through. And I think that's about it really. Show you what I've got stacked up there. It's always good to have a snoop, isn't it? Lots of brushes. Again, I'm not very kind to my brushes, but they serve their purpose. And eventually, I think it's this message, isn't it, that you jump in with what you've got. If that's a biro and an old envelope, just do it, just draw, just get started, because that is the hardest part.